Hola, hello. This is New Mexico History in 10 Minutes. I'm Rob Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. I want to spend some time today talking about Catholic Church reports about New Mexico through the colonial period, into the Mexican period, and then up to our phase as a U.S. territory. We get an amazing glimpse into life in New Mexico through these reports, although they are biased and they are usually written by men who are from higher levels of colonial society in Mexico or come all the way from Spain and later on from France to look at the people and the culture of New Mexico and report on it. One of the earliest writings we have is from Fray Esteban de Perea in the early 1630s. He did not like it here. He did not like the people. He considered the Pueblo native peoples to be a very bad influence on the settlers and the children of the settlers who came to New Mexico in 1598 and then in 1600. And he also thought that they were gossip mongers, superstitious, and they were a mixed blood people that he looked down on. When we get into later reports in the 1700s, we also see glimpses into the culture that is evolving in New Mexico. For example, the first bishop to visit New Mexico was Bishop Pedro Tamaron y Romeral. He came from Durango in Mexico to New Mexico in 1760 to check out his flock, his churches, and to see what was going on up here. It's quite touching to read his descriptions of the landscapes and the people, but he also laments the deteriorated state of our churches and the behavior of some of the priests. And he also describes some of the beautiful rivers and creeks and mountains and towns we have here in New Mexico. But we know that by 1760, the Catholic Church physically and spiritually in New Mexico is not very healthy. Granted, it's still here. There are Franciscan priests serving the Pueblo people and the Hispano mixed blood and Genízaro Indians of New Mexico. But those folks are influencing the church as much as the priests and the Catholic Church are influencing them. I've already spoken about Fray Francisco Atanasio Dominguez and his report of 1776. He was a bit superior in his view of the people, describing the mixed blood people as being lower class. Some of the lighter skinned people, he said, could pass for Spaniards, but that wasn't necessarily a compliment. He was still saying there was something with them. Other groups he mentioned as being of bad blood, which was, again, very racist. And he described the Genízaros as essentially being in the grip of the devil and saying that the Spanish spoken here, depending on the group, was okay, and that some folks twisted words around, twisted the pronunciation around. So we get from that church report not such a good view of the people, and he describes how deplorable the condition of the churches are, that they are not in good condition. They're in disrepair. Vestments are not in good condition. The vessels are beat up or scratched, and that some of the priests, again, do a good job, but some are doing less than a good job. And he also looks down on the native artwork here, as well as the work of Bernardo Miray Pacheco, who was from Spain, but still his artwork was not up to the level that Dominguez was used to seeing down in the bigger, wealthier churches and towns in Nueva España, in what's now Mexico. When we get into the early 1800s, into the late colonial period, again, a priest in Albuquerque who comes from outside of New Mexico describes the local population as Genízaro Indians, mestizos, mulattos, and he says that some have Spanish blood, but it's slight. There's not much. And he says that the people here call themselves Spanish, but they're not, and that the Spanish they speak is not very clear and not very good. By 1818, we have this conflict and stress between Franciscans who are on the way out and diocesan priests who are on the way in. And the bishop at the time, around 1815 to 1825, again, during the Spanish colonial period into the Mexican period, he is Jose Antonio Castiniza, and he really wants to get the Franciscans out of New Mexico and put his own diocesan priest. So he sends a man by the name of Juan Bautista Guevara to report on what's going on in New Mexico. And once again, he says that the churches are in terrible condition. He says the best church as far as condition is down in Guadalupe del Paso, which was part of New Mexico still in 1818. But he says these churches, they are filthy, they have bats, they have birds in them, there's paintings of saints on animal skins. He compares the condition of the insides of the church with the basements of the pulque taverns, the cellars of pulque taverns down in Mexico. Pulque is a fermented drink that people consumed in Mexico. So he was very critical of our churches, of the architecture, and of the priests. He says the Franciscans are terrible, they're deplorable, they are not catechizing the local Nuevo Mexicanos, that they slight the sacraments, and that the pueblos are very unacculturated to Catholic doctrine and Catholic teachings. So he blames the Franciscan priests. He blames them for being lackadaisical, that they are lazy, some of them are drunks. And he says that the Franciscan order is sending the worst priests of the order to New Mexico, that New Mexico is a dumping ground for troublemakers from Spain and from Mexico. So he is very critical of what's going on up here. What's interesting in all of these reports on New Mexico is that there's no mention of the Penitentes. That tells us that they are a later development. We finally hear mention of them in 1845 during the Mexican period, when Bishop Zubiria of Durango comes up from Durango to check out New Mexico. And his report is not much better than his predecessors. He has the same thing to say, that there's a lack of priests, that the people are not catechized well, but he does mention the Penitentes, and it's interesting because he is very critical of them. He calls them butchers because of their bloody Semana Santa, Holy Week practices of whipping themselves and chanting alabados. And for him, it's a very foreign and eccentric, esoteric religious expression that he doesn't seem to see much Catholicism in that group of brothers and brotherhoods in the towns of New Mexico. So I just want to plant the seed that this group is a relatively new arrival from the early 1800s. So by the time we get to 1850, we're a territory of the United States, and the Catholic Church sends New Mexico their first bishop. That would be JeanBaptiste Lamia, a Frenchman from around Toulouse, France. He arrives in 1850, and when he gets here, he's not too impressed with the architecture of the church that he has to oversee in Santa Fe, or any of the churches. He's not impressed with the shortage of priests, or the dozen or so priests that are here from Mexico and local men. So he really has to adjust his perceptions of New Mexico and of the Penitentes, who are very influential in the area. They are caretakers of local people. They are religious leaders. They're not ordained, but they're still a major part of local Nuevo Mexico culture. So this is what Lamia has to deal with. So he also sees that over the centuries, New Mexico has developed, as Father Steele once said, un misticismo tosco, a rough-hewn spirituality. So I just want to set up this idea of New Mexico culture, which by 1850, we are part of the United States and we are perceived as Mexican, speaking a Mexican language and living a Mexican culture. And so the church reports throughout the centuries give us a real insight into the evolution of Nuevo Mexicano culture, which is firmly tied to Mexicano culture in the South, to places like Juarez, which used to be called Guadalupe del Paso, and places like Chihuahua and Parral, Durango, Zacatecas. So with that, I want to set up the arrival of American government, United States religious influences, and not just Roman Catholic. We're going to start to see a lot of Protestants come into the area, and they also have a major influence, a radical shift in religious practices in New Mexico. Never mind Ashkenazi Jews that are starting to come out as well, and they will mix with ancient New Mexican Catholic practices and Native American religious and spiritual activities as well. Thank you very much. I will talk to you soon. Adios. Goodbye.